I know you are ready for another story, but tonight we're not telling the usual tale. This one is drenched in imperial blood and arena sand, where ambition twisted a ruler's mind and turned Rome's golden age into a spectacle of madness and excess. However, I promise this isn't another story. It's a descent into the corrupted heart of absolute power, where a young emperor born to greatness chose infamy instead. A journey through gilded halls where whispers of conspiracy echoed alongside the roars of captive beasts, training for slaughter. I want to tell you about a time when the empire stretched across 3 continents and one man's whims could determine the fate of millions. An era when the line between divinity and madness blurred in the mind of a ruler who abandoned his father's wisdom for the roaring approval of the mob. From the marble palaces of the Palatine Hill rose a name both blessed and cursed by history: Commodus. But who exactly was Commodus? The emperor who abandoned his throne to fight as a gladiator, the son of a philosopher king who chose the sword over the scroll. I challenge you to imagine yourself in a world where the most powerful man alive steps down from his golden throne to battle criminals and captured warriors in the blood-soaked sand. Where an emperor claims to be the reincarnation of Hercules, while Rome itself begins to crumble around him. Are you ready to bear with me as we uncover how a beloved emperor's son transformed from a promising heir into a tyrant obsessed with his own glory? How the gladiator emperor's reign marked the beginning of Rome's long decline from its greatest heights. Discover how Commodus, son of the great Marcus Aurelius, inherited not just an empire, but a legacy he would tarnish with blood and spectacle. Born to power, raised in luxury, he abandoned wisdom for the roar of the arena, trading the philosopher's scroll for the gladiator's sword. I promise this tale of Commodus reveals how even the mightiest empire could tremble under one man's vanity. The emperor who fought as a gladiator while Rome burned around him, who renamed the eternal city after himself, who believed himself a living god while his people starved. Now, relax in a comfortable position. Our stories don't require you to watch the video. They are narrated to guide you on a relaxing journey to fall asleep as you listen. Feel your body relaxing, your shoulders, your hips. A warm feeling slowly relaxes your entire body from head to toe as if you are entering a warm bath of soothing water. Your body begins to relax as the water slowly rises from your feet to your legs, your torso, your shoulders. You feel every single muscle becoming more and more relaxed. Feel the comfort of this moment. Focus on the story and allow the narrative to gently lead you toward a comfortable sleep. And now, let the world of our heroes begin. The day I was born, Rome celebrated. Trumpets blared from the 7 hills, and my father, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, proclaimed a week of games. I was Lucius Aurelius Commodus, heir to the mightiest empire the world had ever known. If only they knew what I would become. My childhood passed in gilded halls, tutored by the finest minds in philosophy and rhetoric. Yet it was the gladiators who captured my imagination. While my father fought barbarians at our borders, I fought wooden opponents in palace courtyards, dreaming of the day the crowds would chant my name. Father never understood my passion. A true emperor conquers himself first, he would lecture, his eyes weary from campaigns and governance. But I had no interest in conquering myself. I wanted to conquer the arena, to feel blood spray across my face as the mob screamed for more. Rome deserved a god emperor, not a philosopher. I was born on August 31st, 161 AD, a momentous day for Rome. My father, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, held me in his arms with tears in his eyes. "A son born in the purple," the senators whispered. No emperor's son had been born during his father's reign since Domitian almost a century before. The palace buzzed with celebration, and I felt the weight of destiny even in my earliest memories. My twin brother, Titus Aurelius Fulvus Antoninus, shared my cradle in those first years. We were inseparable, mirror images gurgling in our royal nursery. But the gods had different plans. When we were 4, fever took him while sparing me. I remember my mother's wails echoing through the palace corridors. Why had I survived when he had not? The question haunted my childhood. Being porphyrogenitus, born to the purple, meant I never knew a common life. My earliest memories are of golden plates, silk cushions, and servants anticipating my every whim. Tutors taught me Greek before I could properly walk, and philosophers debated at my father's table while I listened from behind curtains. The marble halls of power were my playground, the imperial guard my playmates. Father was often away at the frontiers, defending our borders. In his absence, I became the little emperor of my own realm. Servants bowed when I passed, and guards saluted my childish commands. I remember strutting through the gardens, practicing the imperial gait I'd seen my father use. "The gods have marked him," I overheard a senator tell my mother. "He carries divine favor." By age 5, I understood that my father ruled the world. Maps in my schoolroom showed Rome's vast territories. Britannia, Gaul, Egypt, Syria, all under our family's control. "One day, this will all be yours," my tutor explained, tracing the empire's borders with his finger. I nodded solemnly, as if comprehending the magnitude of such inheritance, though in truth I was more interested in the colorful inks than the lands they represented. My mother, Faustina, would stroke my hair and tell me stories of my grandfather, Antoninus Pius, and the great Hadrian before him. "Divine blood flows in your veins," she whispered. "The gods have chosen you to follow your father." After losing my twin, my parents guarded me jealously, as if I might vanish like morning mist. Perhaps that was where it began. My certainty that I was not merely born to rule, but preserved by the gods for that sacred purpose. Father's shadow loomed largest in the Senate. I watched him there often, dispensing justice with that unflinching stoic resolve. His voice never raised, his decisions never hurried. The senators hung on his every word while I stood in the corner, a princeling draped in purple, feeling smaller with each wise pronouncement he made. How could flesh of my flesh feel so foreign? Remember, Commodus, a true emperor serves Rome, not himself. His lessons were constant, delivered between military dispatches and philosophical treatise. While other boys played with wooden swords, I memorized Epictetus. While they chased girls, I attended strategy meetings. My tutors, especially stern Onesicritus, reinforced father's unyielding principles with merciless precisions. I treasured those rare moments when father's attention turned fully to me. Once, returning from the Danube frontier, he took me hunting. I killed a magnificent stag and turned, heart pounding with pride, seeking his approval. He merely nodded and said, Remember the deer feels pain as we do. Take no pleasure in necessary death. My triumph withered instantly. The Meditations. His endless philosophical scribblings. How I came to resent those wax tablets and scrolls that claimed his attention when I could not. The empire had his days. His writings took his nights. What remained for his son? I once stole one of his tablets and read his thoughts on duty and virtue. Nothing about me, his heir, his blood. The people adored him. Marcus the wise, Marcus the just. I walked in his wake through the forum, watching plebeians bow and merchants offer gifts. Their eyes would find me afterward, measuring, always measuring. The unspoken question hung in every gaze. Will the son ever match the father? I smiled while my insides twisted with inadequacy. I found refuge in the Colosseum, where philosophy held no sway. There, among gladiators and charioteers, strength and spectacle reigned supreme. Father tolerated my fascination, calling it a phase of youth. He never understood it was escape. In the arena's roar, I found what his stoic world denied me: passion, excitement, and the intoxicating adoration of crowds. My education began before dawn each day. Father appointed the finest minds in Rome as my tutors. Greeks, mostly, with their endless scrolls and stern expressions. I excelled in physical training, my body responding to discipline far better than my mind. The sword felt natural in my hand. Philosophy did not. My tutors saw this as failure. I saw it as knowing my true nature. Rhetoric bored me to tears, though I learned to craft arguments that pleased my tutors while revealing nothing of my true thoughts. Greek came easily. The language of culture, they said. Literature I tolerated. But military strategy. There my mind blazed with interest. I would sketch battle formations while pretending to take notes on Aristotle's ethics. My philosophy tutor, Rusticus, was the worst, droning endlessly about Stoic principles that Father embraced, but I found suffocating. Control your passions, he would lecture, while I dreamed of the arena's roar. Once, catching me distracted, he made me recite Marcus Aurelius's Meditations for hours. I performed flawlessly, hiding my resentment behind perfect recitation. I found refuge in the gladiatorial games, the honesty of combat, the raw emotion of the crowd. My tutors despised this vulgar entertainment, but couldn't forbid the imperial heir his pleasures. I studied those fighters more carefully than any text. Their techniques, their courage. There was more wisdom in their eyes than in all of Plato's Republic. My first taste of power came when Father allowed me to judge a minor dispute among household staff. I rendered judgment swiftly, decisively, not weighing arguments endlessly as he would have. The servants' faces showed surprise at my directness. Later, I overheard my tutors discussing my alarming lack of deliberation. They didn't understand that decisiveness is a virtue in a leader. Father wanted a philosopher king like himself, but Rome needed a warrior emperor for the coming storms. My tutors filled my head with ideals while ignoring reality beyond our borders. I learned their lessons perfectly while inwardly rejecting them. They praised my intellect while missing my strategy. I was becoming not the emperor they were molding, but the one Rome truly required. The day I became Caesar at 5 years old remains a blur of purple silk and solemn faces. Father lifted me before the Senate, his voice echoing through the marble chamber as he named me his successor. I remember the weight of the golden laurel crown, too heavy for my small head, and how the senators bowed, not to the child I was, but to the power I represented. 10 years later, in 176 AD, I stood again before Rome's elite, no longer a child but a youth of 15. Father proclaimed me co-Augustus, his equal in power, if not in wisdom. The legions cheered as I addressed them for the first time as their emperor. My voice didn't waver. I had rehearsed for days, but my heart thundered louder than their shields striking the ground in salute. How quickly people changed once I wore the purple of an Augustus. Courtiers who had tousled my hair now bowed deeply as I passed. Senators who had ignored me sought private audiences. Even Father's advisors, especially Pompeianus, began addressing me directly rather than speaking through tutors. Power transformed me from a boy to a man in their eyes, though I remained the same person beneath my new titles. My first decree as co-Augustus was to double the grain allowance for the plebeians during the Saturnalia festival. Father frowned. He worried about the treasury, but the people loved it. I heard their cheers from the palace, saw their grateful faces when I rode through the streets. Father ruled through philosophy and duty. I discovered something more powerful: generosity and connection with ordinary Romans. Father assigned me to oversee the games and public festivals, tasks he considered beneath his philosophical concerns. I embraced them. While he spent hours with dusty scrolls and stoic advisors, I walked among the people, feeling their pulse, understanding their desires. I increased the number of gladiatorial contests and added exotic beasts from Africa. The crowds roared my name, while Father's advisors whispered their disapproval. The people need bread and spectacle, not just virtue, I told Father after a particularly successful festival. His brow furrowed, as it always did when he disagreed. They need wisdom and justice, he countered. But I had seen their faces light up at my generosity, heard them chant my name. Rome didn't need another philosopher-emperor. It needed me. A ruler who understood that power meant connection, not just contemplation. The bitter winds of Vindobona cut through the camp that March day in 180. I stood rigid outside my father's tent, listening to his labored breathing. The great Marcus Aurelius, master of the world, reduced to a withered figure on sweat-soaked bedding. Physicians moved silently, mixing potions that filled the air with sharp herbal scents. Their faces told what their lips dared not. Rome would soon have a new emperor. Father had been ill for days, but this morning brought the change we feared. His skin had taken on the pallor of marble, his once commanding voice reduced to whispers. I felt a storm of emotions as I watched him, genuine grief tangled with a shameful anticipation. The weight of Rome's future pressed upon my shoulders even as my heart ached for the man who had demanded so much perfection from his son. "Commodus," he called, his voice suddenly stronger. The generals and advisors withdrew to the edges of the tent as I approached. Father's eyes, though clouded with pain, fixed upon mine with that familiar intensity. "Remember," he whispered, "that you become what you think about. Choose your thoughts with care." Even dying, he lectured me. Even now his words were of duty, not affection. By midday, he summoned his officers. I stood beside his bed as he presented me as his successor. "My son is your emperor now," he declared, his voice surprisingly firm. The men knelt, fists to hearts. I searched their faces. Some showed genuine loyalty, others carefully masked calculation. Pertinax, my father's trusted general, caught my eye with an unreadable expression that sent a chill through me. As twilight approached, father's breathing grew shallow. The physicians withdrew, their arts exhausted. I sat alone with him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. "I wanted to make you proud," I whispered, words I could never speak while he was well. His eyes fluttered open one last time. "Be virtuous," he murmured. Then Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, emperor of Rome, exhaled and did not inhale again. I closed his eyes with trembling fingers as the camp fell silent in the knowledge of his passing. Outside, I heard the whispers begin, the movement of men preparing for the rituals of imperial death. I remained motionless, my father's final word echoing. Virtuous. His path, not mine. In that moment, I silently vowed to rule as I saw fit. The golden age of my father would give way to my own vision for Rome. The day after my father's funeral, I summoned the military council. The weathered faces of my generals grew taut with surprise as I announced my intention to make peace with the Germanic tribes. "We shall withdraw from the Danube frontier and return to Rome," I declared. The silence that followed was heavier than a legion's march. Father had spent years pursuing conquest in the north. I was abandoning his campaign before his ashes had cooled. Pompeianus, my father's most trusted general, rose first. "Caesar," he protested, his voice trembling with barely contained outrage. "We stand at the precipice of total victory. The barbarians are weakened. One final campaign will secure these lands for Rome." Others joined his chorus of dissent. I studied their mud-stained boots and weather-beaten faces, men who had known nothing but frontier warfare for decades. "The treasury bleeds gold while Rome's heart grows faint," I countered. "These endless northern wars drain our coffers, and for what? More forests? More barbarians?" I paced the perimeter of the war table, letting my fingers trail across the map. I have seen enough of cold, muddy camps. Rome calls to her emperor, and I intend to answer. The truth, unspoken but understood, was that I craved the comforts of the capital. I arranged a meeting with the tribal chieftains 3 days later. I ensured they witnessed the full spectacle of imperial might. My praetorians in polished armor, my retinue draped in silks, my person adorned with the jewels of empire. Yet I offered generous terms, land, gold, and recognition. Their wary eyes widened with each concession. They had expected ultimatums. Instead, I extended an open hand. "You offer peace when victory seems within your grasp," said Marcomir, the eldest chieftain, his voice like gravel. "Why should we trust this sudden change?" I smiled, leaning forward, because endless war serves neither Rome nor your people. My father sought glory through conquest. I seek prosperity through trade. The negotiations lasted until dawn, but when we finished, I had achieved through words what years of warfare could not. I returned to Rome triumphant in my own way. The Senate received the news of peace with cautious approval. The merchants and tax collectors certainly welcomed it. Only the old military men grumbled, claiming I had surrendered my father's legacy. Perhaps they were right. But as I reclined in the imperial palace that night, warm baths and soft couches replacing tent canvas and camp beds, I knew I had made the choice that suited me best. Rome welcomed me with open arms that golden autumn of 180 AD. The roads leading to the capital were strewn with flower petals, creating a fragrant carpet beneath the hooves of my white stallions. Citizens lined the streets 10 deep, their faces alight with joy as they glimpsed their new emperor. The air vibrated with their chants. Ave Commodus, Ave Imperator. I had dreamed of this moment for years. My triumphal procession wound through the ancient streets like a glittering serpent. Trumpeters heralded my approach, while captives from the northern campaigns shuffled behind in chains, living testaments to Roman might. The spoils of war followed. Gold, silver, exotic animals, and weapons all paraded before the awe-struck populace. In my golden chariot, I stood tall, my crimson cape billowing in the breeze, savoring every moment of adulation. The Senate House fell silent as I entered, my footsteps echoing across the marble floor. These men who had served my father now looked upon his son with expectant eyes. I spoke with confidence beyond my years, promising peace and prosperity to Rome. The time of war is ended, I declared. Let the time of Commodus bring joy. I announced lavish games to celebrate my return, 100 days of spectacles that would eclipse all that came before. That evening, I announced my gift to the people and my protectors. 725 denarii to each Praetorian Guard soldier, the most generous donative in Rome's history. The crowd's roar was deafening. I watched as the news spread through the forum like wildfire. Men wept openly, women blew kisses, children danced. "Commodus the generous," they cried. "Commodus the magnificent." Power, I discovered, purchased through coin, was sweeter than that inherited by blood. My first night in the imperial palace was strange and wondrous. I wandered through chambers where my father had once paced, deep in philosophical thought. Now, these rooms belonged to me alone. I trailed my fingers across marble busts of ancestors, their stone eyes watching as I claimed what was rightfully mine. Servants scurried to fulfill my every whim, however slight. I slept in the imperial bed, sprawled across silken sheets, dreaming of the Rome I would create. Freedom tasted like the sweetest wine. No longer did I feel my father's restraining hand upon my shoulder, his whispered words of caution in my ear. Rome was mine to shape as I desired. The people loved their handsome young emperor who brought them games and gold. I stood on the palace balcony that first week, gazing over the 7 hills glowing in sunset light, and felt the exhilaration of absolute power coursing through my veins. How was I to know that such intoxication would lead to madness? Father's old advisors watched me with judgment in their eyes. I saw how they whispered when I passed, their gazes heavy with comparison to Marcus Aurelius. They thought me unworthy, a pale shadow of greatness. I knew then they could not remain. Power, once tasted, demands protection. Those who served my father would never truly serve me. Their loyalty remained with a ghost, not the living emperor before them. I began with subtle dismissals. The old General Pompeius, who dared question my military judgment, found himself replaced by my companion, Saoterus. My childhood friend understood what the veterans did not, that an emperor's will is divine law. When Senator Claudius objected to my appointments, I reminded him how fragile senatorial privileges were. The message spread quickly. Loyalty to Commodus himself, not to Rome, was the path to advancement. Perennis proved himself invaluable. While I devoted my time to the pleasures of the arena and banquet hall, he managed the tedious affairs of state. He understood my vision. Rome existed to glorify its emperor, not the reverse. When he suggested eliminating 3 provincial governors who had been my father's friends, I agreed without hesitation. Their execution sent the perfect message no position was secure without my favor. My sister Lucilla became problematic. She carried herself as if she were still the emperor's daughter rather than the emperor's sister. Her husband, Pompeianus, that dour soldier so beloved by my father, constantly reminded the court of how Marcus would have ruled. I could not tolerate such comparison. When rumors reached me of their criticism, I knew action was required. Family or not, none could challenge divine authority. I exiled Lucilla to Capri after discovering her involvement in a plot against me. Pompeianus I spared, but stripped of influence, he retreated from public life. Some called me paranoid, but they failed to understand the burden of empire. Every shadow concealed an assassin, every whisper a conspiracy. I trusted only those who worshipped me as Hercules reborn. The others, they were merely waiting for weakness. By the 2nd year of my reign, I had remade the court in my image. Gone were my father's philosophical friends, replaced by wrestlers, charioteers, and those who appreciated spectacle. When I entered the arena myself, my new officials cheered appropriately, understanding their lives depended on their enthusiasm. I was no longer merely emperor. I was Commodus Invictus, the unconquerable, and Rome would learn to adore me as such. The masses craved spectacle, and I gave them wonders beyond imagination. I decreed 140 days of games, unprecedented in Rome's history. The Colosseum roared with approval as I entered my imperial box, the crowd chanting my name until the very foundations trembled. I smiled and raised my hand. The people fell silent, awaiting my signal. With a simple gesture, I unleashed their entertainment and secured their love. I spared no expense importing beasts from the empire's farthest reaches. Striped tigers from Hyrcania, lions from Africa, and elephants from distant India, all paraded before dying for Rome's entertainment. 5,000 animals perished in a single day's spectacle. The blood-soaked sand bore witness to my generosity. My agents scoured the world for novelties, and the people's gasps of wonder were worth every denarius spent from the imperial treasury. The gladiators I patronized became legends. Mighty Carpophorus, the beast slayer, swift tigress of Gaul, the unconquered Flamma, I elevated them from mere fighters to heroes worshipped throughout Rome. I doubled their purses and granted wooden swords of freedom to the most valorous. When I personally descended to congratulate a victor, the crowd's adoration was deafening. The Senate might whisper of extravagance, but they could not deny the people's love. My generosity extended beyond mere entertainment. I ordered the granaries opened during shortages, distributed food to every household in Rome, and remitted taxes in provinces struck by misfortune. After the games, I hosted feasts where wine flowed freely through public fountains. The plebeians ate from my table as surely as any senator. When floods damaged the poor quarters, I personally inspected the reconstruction efforts, touching the hands of common laborers. I restored the Temple of Jupiter to greater splendor than Augustus had achieved, rebuilt the Circus Maximus after fire damage, and commissioned baths open to all citizens. Each dedication ceremony became an opportunity to address the people directly. Let the senators fume in their villas. I spoke to the heart of Rome itself. The plebeians were my true constituency, and I made certain they knew it. Their cheers echoed through the streets long after I returned to the palace. Some counselors whispered that I debased myself through such familiarity with commoners. Fools! They failed to understand that true power flows from the people's love, not from dusty scrolls of law or the Senate's approval. When I entered the circus and 50,000 voices called my name in unison, I felt the very essence of Rome coursing through my veins. This was leadership, to give the people what they truly desired. Bread and circuses? No, sustenance and joy, the foundations of a content empire. The notion seized me gradually, like a fever. To be merely emperor was no longer enough. I deserved worship as a living god. It began with Hercules. I felt his strength course through my veins. I appeared before the Senate draped in a lion's skin, a wooden club resting on my shoulder. Their stunned faces delighted me. Some looked away, others stared in disbelief. But I saw fear in their eyes, divine fear, as it should be. Mercury came to me in dreams, whispering of his swift cunning. Jupiter's thunderous power called next, and finally Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. I was all of them, and they were me. I ordered new coins struck with my likeness as each deity. The mint workers trembled as I inspected their work. More radiance in the crown, I demanded. The eyes must pierce the soul of anyone who gazes upon them. Was it strategy or conviction that drove me? Perhaps both. The common people needed a god they could see, touch, fear. The elite required reminding that their emperor transcended mortal limitations. I renamed the months after my titles: Commodianus, Herculeus, Romanus. When my advisors cautioned restraint, I banished them. Gods need no counsel from lesser beings. Statues rose throughout Rome and beyond. My form rendered in marble and bronze, always with divine attributes. In one, I stood as Mercury with winged sandals. In another, as Jupiter with thunderbolt in hand. The finest sculptors worked day and night. I visited their workshops unannounced, studying their progress. The divinity must be unmistakable, I told them. When people pray before these statues, they must feel my presence. The Senate mocked me behind closed doors. I had my informants. The philosophers exchanged knowing glances when I passed. Yet the plebeians prostrated themselves, built small shrines in their homes, bearing my likeness. I arranged public miracles, hidden mechanisms that made temple doors open at my approach, secret pipes that poured wine instead of water when I commanded it. Their gasps of wonder fed my conviction. My transformation was complete when I demanded sacrifices be made to me, not merely for me. Those who hesitated faced my wrath. I felt my humanity slipping away, a necessary sacrifice for ascension. At night, I stood alone on my palace balcony, gazing at the stars, convinced they were my celestial brethren. The mortal emperor was fading. In his place, a god was emerging. Rome would either worship or burn. The arena called to me long before I wore the purple. As a boy, I watched from the imperial box as men battled for glory and survival. While my father, Marcus Aurelius, found such spectacles distasteful, preferring his philosophical scrolls, I saw something pure in the combat, truth written in blood and sand. The crowd's roar, the gleam of weapons, the dance of death. It awakened something primal within me that no amount of Stoic teachings could suppress. I commissioned a private ludus on the Palatine Hill, hidden from disapproving eyes. My lanista, Quintus, a scarred veteran of 100 fights, raised his eyebrows when I first appeared, but gold silenced his objections. We began with rudis, wooden practice swords, before progressing to real steel. I trained not as emperor, but as any other novice, suffering the same bruises, the same exhaustion, the same harsh corrections. My days took on a soldier's rhythm. I rose before dawn for running and strength exercises, lifting weighted sacks, climbing ropes, swimming against the Tiber's current. Afternoons brought weapons drills, the thrust and parry of the gladius, the deadly arc of the psycha, the balanced weight of trident and net. Quintus taught me to fight as both Thraex and Myrmilieu, saying versatility meant survival. In the arena's simplicity, I found escape from imperial politics. Court life was a nest of vipers, whispers, plots, and poisoned words. But in combat, there was only truth. A man's skill determined his fate, not his lineage or wealth. When I landed a perfect strike against Quintus himself, drawing first blood in our sparring, the pride I felt surpassed any satisfaction from affairs of state. My advisors were horrified, of course. "The emperor debases himself," Cleander whispered to others, thinking I couldn't hear. "Such activities are for criminals and war prisoners, not the son of Marcus Aurelius." Their concerns only fueled my determination. What did these soft-handed politicians know of Rome's true spirit? My father had lost touch with the empire's heart in his philosophical musings. I would reclaim it. With each passing month, my skills grew sharper. I mastered the Demacharis style, fighting with dual blades in a whirlwind of steel. I learned to read an opponent's intent in the shift of weight, the flicker of eyes. The wooden practice armor was replaced with bronze, then ceremonial gold. In my private thoughts, I began to imagine stepping into the Colosseum not as emperor, but as combatant. The fantasy grew more vivid each day. The day finally arrived. I, Commodus, would fight in the Colosseum not as spectator, but as gladiator. No emperor had ever done this before. As dawn broke, I felt a strange calm wash over me. My attendants arrived with specially crafted armor, gleaming bronze with gold inlay, a helmet adorned with the imperial eagle. This was not merely combat. It was the birth of a legend. I chose the secutor-style sword and shield, the people's favorite. My opponent would be a retiarius, net and trident fighter. The match was arranged, of course. He would challenge me, but ultimately submit. The Senate objected vehemently to my participation, but I silenced them. The divine Hercules himself fought in contests, I reminded them. Am I not his living embodiment on earth? The Colosseum roared as I entered. 50,000 voices chanting my name. The herald's announcement was drowned by the crowd's disbelief as they realized their emperor truly stood before them as combatant. The sand burned through my sandals. Sweat beaded under my helmet. The weight of my shield pulled at my arm. I tasted copper and dust. This moment, this was power beyond the throne. My opponent entered from the opposite gate, a skilled gladiator, though instructed to provide spectacle without true danger. We circled each other as the Lanista had choreographed. The first exchange of blows sent vibrations up my arm. The crowd gasped when his trident grazed my shield. I felt more alive than ever before, half emperor, half god, fully warrior. This was my true destiny. 3 exchanges, each more dramatic than the last. I landed a calculated blow to his thigh. He fell convincingly. The crowd held its collective breath as I stood over him, sword raised. The familiar gesture followed his index finger extended in submission. I looked to the crowd who roared their approval for mercy. I helped him rise, magnanimous in victory. The arena thundered with approval. That night, Rome celebrated. I had transformed the role of emperor forever. No longer merely a ruler who watched games, I was a participant in Rome's greatest spectacle. 12 more times I would enter the arena, each appearance more elaborate than the last. The people no longer saw me as merely their emperor. I had become something greater, Hercules reborn, a divine warrior king who shared in their beloved games. The morning after my first gladiatorial appearance, Rome erupted in scandal. Senators huddled in corners, whispering with horror-stricken faces. At the forum, I overheard Cassius Dio lamenting to his colleagues, "The emperor has exchanged the dignity of his position for the sweat and blood of the arena." Their disapproving glances followed me everywhere. Little did they know, this was merely the beginning of my new vision for imperial connection with the people. My advisors begged me to reconsider. "Your Majesty," pleaded Claudius, my aged counselor, his hands trembling, "you dishonor centuries of imperial tradition." My own sister refused to dine with me, claiming my hands reeked of the arena's sand. Even my mother sent a scathing letter from her country villa. I folded it carefully and added it to my collection of criticisms. Their outrage only confirmed I was breaking the right barriers. The common people, however, adored me for it. They lined the streets as I passed, reaching to touch the hem of my toga. "The fighting emperor!" they cheered. In the marketplace, I heard a fruit seller defending me. "He bleeds like us, fights like us." Finally, an emperor who understands our passions. Their adoration was worth every drop of sweat I shed in the arena. This was the connection no emperor before me had achieved. After each performance, I charged the treasury 1,000,000 sesterces, a fee worthy of my imperial talent. "Outrageous!" thundered Senator Gallus during the session. "He depletes our coffers to pay himself for degrading his office." I smiled at the memory while counting the coins. The money funded new public works and games for the people, though I kept this detail private. Let the senators seethe. Their indignation was becoming rather entertaining. The confrontation with the Senate grew bitter. "You have transformed the Palatine into a gladiator's barracks," accused Tacitus, his patrician face flushed with anger. I leaned forward on my throne. and you have forgotten that Rome was built by warriors, not by men who fear to dirty their hands, I replied. The chamber fell silent. That evening I found 3 senators had requested transfers to distant provinces. My influence in the arena was changing the balance of power. They simply failed to understand my vision. While they clung to outdated notions of dignitas, I forged a new bond between ruler and ruled. In the arena, stripped of pretense, I became truly Roman again. After my 5th victory, a wounded gladiator clasped my arm and called me brother. No political alliance ever felt so genuine. The old guard would resist until the end, but history would vindicate me. Rome needed this transformation, whether the Senate approved or not. I no longer merely performed as a gladiator. I had become Hercules incarnate. The transformation began gradually. First the lion skin draped across my shoulders, then the olive wood club gripped in my hand. My muscles, already substantial from years of training, seemed to swell with divine power. In the arena, I demanded a new introduction. Hercules Romanus. The crowd's roars fed my conviction. The boundary between performance and reality blurred until it vanished altogether. I commissioned elaborate mythological reenactments that showcased my divine prowess. Condemned criminals played the parts of the Nemean lion or the Erymanthian boar, meeting their fates at my hand. I recreated the 12 labors with meticulous attention to detail. The Senate watched with unease as I cleansed the Augean stables, represented by corrupt officials I had removed. My performances were not mere entertainment, but sacred demonstrations of divine power. My likeness as Hercules soon adorned every corner of Rome. Marble statues depicted me with the hero's attributes: the lion's skin, the club, the divine musculature. I ordered temples constructed where citizens could worship Hercules Romanus. Previous emperors had merely associated themselves with gods. I had become one. Augustus claimed Apollo's patronage, but I had achieved something far greater, a complete divine transformation that even the blind could sense in my presence. Each night, I communed with the spirit of Hercules through private rituals learned from Eastern mystics. I fasted, meditated, and offered sacrifices that strengthened our bond. The divine essence flowed through my veins more surely than blood. In my private chambers, I kept an ancient altar said to have been used by Hercules himself during his mortal days. When I placed my hands upon it, visions of Olympus filled my mind, proof of my transformation that none could deny. Some fools treated my divine nature as mere theatrics. I saw their skeptical glances, their whispers behind cupped hands. A senator once suggested we return to matters of state now that the performance is complete. I had him executed for blasphemy. Did they mock Jupiter himself so brazenly? The cult of Hercules had existed in Rome since ancient times, the divine hero who achieved godhood through great deeds. Was I not following the same path, achieving what was my destiny? My communion with Hercules deepened. In dreams we wrestled together, his strength becoming mine. I consulted ancient texts, describing how Hercules ascended to Olympus through his funeral pyre. Would my own ascension be as glorious? I began planning a magnificent temple complex that would dwarf all others in Rome. There the people would witness the final proof of my divinity. My mortal shell grew increasingly insufficient to contain the god I had become. They called me Commodus the left-handed in the arena, a title I wore with more pride than emperor. My sinister approach bewildered opponents trained against right-handed fighters. I exploited this advantage mercilessly, striking from unexpected angles. The crowd roared when I revealed my peculiar stance, shield in right hand, sword gripped firmly in my left. Even seasoned gladiators faltered against this unorthodox technique. My most memorable combat was against Lucius, champion of the Ludus Magnus. I employed the Murmillo style that day, heavy helmet, rectangular shield, and short sword. He fought as a Thraex with curved blade and small shield. Our dance lasted nearly an hour before I found my opening. His movement slowed just enough, perhaps deliberately, for my left-handed thrust to slip past his guard. The crowd's adulation washed over me like divine nectar. I mastered every gladiatorial style. As secutor, I pursued retiarii with their nets and tridents, my left-handed attacks confounding their defensive strategies. When fighting as Thraex, my curved blade found gaps in armor that right-handed fighters missed. I recorded each victory meticulously, 735 by my final count. Scribes questioned this tally, but I knew my achievements were real, regardless of what court whispers suggested. My palace chambers gradually transformed into an armory. Beside imperial regalia and ancestral busts stood my collection of gladiatorial weapons. Swords worn smooth from combat, helmets dented by worthy opponents, shields bearing the scars of battle. I often retired to this sanctuary, running fingers over my left-handed adaptations to standard equipment. These modifications gave me advantage and identity beyond the purple robes of office. My technique evolved with each fight. I developed a signature feint, a slight rightward shift that opponents instinctively tracked before my left hand delivered the decisive blow. The arena physicians marveled at the precision of my strikes. "Your left arm possesses the strength of Hercules," one told me. Few understood that my advantage came not merely from strength, but from the element of surprise that left-handedness provided in combat. Critics claimed my victories were staged, my opponents intentionally yielding. They didn't witness my daily training, hours spent strengthening my left arm until it could cleave a practice dummy in a single stroke. They never felt the sting of sand in wounds after falling during practice bouts. I was no pretender. The blood I shed, both mine and others, proved my legitimacy. In the arena, I wasn't emperor. I was simply the greatest left-handed gladiator Rome had ever known. The arena fell silent as I entered. That day I slaughtered 100 lions with my own hands, a feat no emperor had accomplished before. Each beast charged at me with primal fury, yet each fell to my arrows and spears. Blood soaked the sand as I moved with divine precision. The crowd's roars grew louder with each kill, their adoration feeding my power. By sunset, 100 carcasses surrounded me, testament to my dominion over nature itself. I spared no expense importing the rarest creatures from the farthest reaches of our empire. Elephants from darkest Africa, tigers from distant Persia, giraffes with necks tall as trees, all brought to Rome at astronomical cost. The beasts traveled in specially constructed ships and cages, fed the finest foods to maintain their strength. My handlers whispered in fear as they tended these monsters. Their terror amused me. These creatures existed for one purpose: to die by my hand. My technique with the bow became legendary. I perfected a special crescent-headed arrow of my own design for beheading ostriches. The birds continued running headless across the arena, spurting blood in magnificent arcs while the crowd howled with delight. With javelin, I could pierce an elephant's eye at 30 paces. My aim never faltered. My arm never tired. The gods themselves guided my weapons, for I was their instrument of death. We transformed the Colosseum for my hunts, creating landscapes that mimicked the beasts' natural habitats. Engineers diverted water to form lakes where crocodiles thrashed. They planted trees and shrubs to simulate jungles where leopards could prowl before I flushed them out. Underground mechanisms raised rock formations where mountain lions perched briefly before my arrows found their hearts. No emperor before had staged such elaborate spectacles of nature tamed. The logistics of my grand hunts drained the imperial treasury, yet I considered it money well spent. Thousands of men worked for months preparing each event. Trappers, sailors, animal handlers, engineers, and guards. Entire forests were harvested to build the elaborate sets. Special roads were constructed to transport the largest beasts. Provincial governors sent their annual tributes directly to fund my hunts. What better use of Rome's wealth than to demonstrate her emperor's mastery over all creation? Each beast that fell strengthened my divine aura. When I slew the rare white rhinoceros from Ethiopia, the Senate declared a holiday. When I dispatched 7 tigers in 7 minutes, poets composed epics in my honor. The people understood what these hunts truly meant. Their emperor possessed power over life itself. Nature, like the barbarian nations beyond our borders, existed to be conquered, and I, divine Commodus, was the conqueror who made Rome tremble with awe. After my father's death, I needed someone capable to manage the tedious affairs of state while I pursued my true passions. Tigidius Perennis seemed perfect, intelligent, efficient, and seemingly loyal. I appointed him Praetorian Prefect in 182 AD, granting him unprecedented authority. "Handle the empire," I told him, "while I handle the arena." He bowed deeply, a slight smile playing on his lips that I should have recognized as ambition. Our arrangement worked splendidly at first. I spent my days training with gladiators and nights enjoying Rome's pleasures, while Perennis managed everything else. He appointed officials, issued edicts in my name, and controlled who gained my ear. The Senate grumbled but obeyed, addressing him with a deference once reserved only for me. I hardly noticed how thoroughly he had woven himself into the fabric of my power. For 3 years, Perennis ruled while I reigned. The arrangement suited me until whispers reached my ears. Courtiers claiming he amassed wealth beyond measure and appointed only men loyal to him, not to me. "He speaks of your eccentricities to foreign dignitaries," one senator confided. "He sighs and rolls his eyes when delivering your commands." These reports stung my pride, yet I hesitated to act against the man who kept my empire functioning. The truth arrived with mud-splattered soldiers from Britannia in 185 AD. They marched into Rome, demanding audience, their faces grim with purpose. "Your Majesty," their leader declared, kneeling before me, "Perennis plots treason. He positions his sons to command legions and plans to seize your throne." He presented intercepted letters bearing Perennis's seal, evidence of communications with the commanders whose loyalty should have been mine alone. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the evidence. Memories flashed before me. Perennis's subtle dismissals of my ideas, his growing authority, the deference shown him by the Senate. My trusted advisor had become my potential usurper. That night, I summoned him to the palace gardens. "Is it true?" I asked, watching his face carefully. His denial came too quickly, his eyes betraying calculation rather than loyalty. I nodded once to my hidden guards. They executed Perennis that night, along with his sons and closest allies. I watched impassively as his head was separated from his body, the same head that had carried ambitious thoughts against me. In the aftermath, I took greater control of government, but found myself seeing conspiracies everywhere. Who else plotted against me? Which advisor would be next to betray me? The Perennis affair changed me, hardened me. Rome would soon learn the cost of their emperor's broken trust. The sky turned crimson that fateful day in 192 AD. I stood upon the Palatine Hill as flames devoured Rome, my Rome. The fire began near the Forum and spread with demonic speed, consuming everything in its path. Merchants fled their shops, mothers clutched their children, and the Praetorian Guard scrambled to organize some semblance of order. My initial shock quickly faded as I watched the infernos dance across my city. The temples of Peace and Vesta crumbled before my eyes. The great granaries that fed my people collapsed in showers of sparks. Public buildings my ancestors had constructed now served only as fuel for the ravenous blaze. I sent men with buckets and ordered water lines formed, though in truth I found myself transfixed by the spectacle. Was this not Jupiter himself clearing space for something greater? Was this not a sign meant for me alone? After 3 days, the flames finally subsided, leaving half my city in ruins. The people wept in the streets, thousands now homeless. I toured the devastation, stepping over charred timbers and breathing ash. Yet, where others saw only destruction, I recognized divine purpose. This was no tragedy, but opportunity. A canvas cleared by the gods themselves for me to create anew. Rome would rise again, more glorious than before. I decreed that day that Rome would henceforth be known as Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. Why should the greatest city on earth not bear the name of its greatest emperor? I renamed the months after my titles Lucius, Aelius, Aurelius, Commodus, Augustus, Herculeus. Time itself would now flow through my divine identity. My advisors exchanged nervous glances, but none dared question the son of Marcus Aurelius, the living Hercules. The common people suffered greatly, huddled in makeshift shelters outside the city walls. I ordered grain distributed and opened the imperial gardens to those displaced. Yet I knew what truly healed Roman hearts was spectacle. I announced extraordinary games to commemorate our rebirth, 100 days of gladiatorial combat and beast hunts. Let them forget their sorrows in the arena's roar. Let them see their emperor, invincible as Hercules, slay beasts before their eyes. The fire had cleansed Rome of its past. From these ashes would rise a city worthy of my divinity. I commissioned new temples dedicated to Hercules Commodianus, statues of myself as God-Emperor to adorn every district. Architects presented plans for wider avenues, grander forums, and marble facades to replace the wooden tenements. My new Rome would never again burn. It would stand eternal, a testament to my glory long after I ascended to dwell among the gods. The shadows lengthened around me with each passing day. I began to see conspirators in every corner of my palace, in every whispered conversation that ceased as I entered a room. My dreams were filled with daggers and poison cups. I ordered my first purge of the Senate after overhearing a jest about my divine aspirations. 29 patricians lost their heads that month. Safety demanded vigilance. Rome required a firm hand. Mine would not tremble at necessary bloodshed. My brother-in-law, Ummidius Quadratus, had always looked at me with judgment in his eyes. When my informants brought evidence of his correspondence with provincial governors, I recognized the pattern of betrayal. He died protesting innocence, as they all did. His associate Claudius Pompeianus Quintianus proved more direct in his treachery. The fool attempted to strike me with a dagger as I entered the Colosseum passage. His final words, "The Senate sends this," confirmed my suspicions about the vipers I had nurtured at my breast. The treason trials became a daily spectacle. I watched from behind a screen as men who had dined at my table trembled before my judges. Senator Arius, who had once questioned my expenditures for the games, was condemned for disrespect to divine authority. The poet Maternus lost his head for a veiled reference in his verses. Even a glance could be treasonous if my delators interpreted it so. The courtroom echoed with pleas, but mercy was a luxury Rome could not afford during such perilous times. My network of spies grew like a spider's web across Rome. Servants, freedmen, even nobles desperate for favor, all brought me whispers of dissent. I rewarded them generously, knowing each coin purchased another fragment of security. The delators thrived under my reign, men like Regulus who had made an art of accusation. They brought me names, and I gave them wealth and protection. Citizens learned to watch their tongues even in their homes. Walls had ears, and those ears belonged to Commodus. Only in silence could treason be truly prevented. Each night I reviewed the day's executions with a heavy heart but clear conscience. These deaths were necessary sacrifices for Rome's stability. When Pertinax questioned the evidence against his friend Lucilla, I saw the doubt in his eyes. He too joined my list of suspects. The procedures for treason trials were simplified under my authority. Accusation, brief defense, and judgment. The traditional right of appeal to the people was suspended in times of emergency. And was not my reign an endless emergency? Conspirators lurked everywhere, requiring swift justice. The charges expanded with my growing insight into treachery's nature. Disrespect to the divine emperor became the most common indictment. Others fell for harboring seditious thoughts or failing to report treasonous talk. Some questioned my methods, but they misunderstood. I alone could see the invisible web of conspiracy threatening Rome. Each execution tore a strand from that web. I did not enjoy the bloodshed, but as both emperor and god, I bore this terrible responsibility. Rome would thank me one day for the enemies I had eliminated. The treasury's coffers emptied faster than I could count. My new golden statue in Apollo's likeness cost the equivalent of a year's grain for the plebeians. But how could Rome's emperor appear less than divine? The games I commissioned, with exotic beasts from Africa and gladiators trained at ruinous expense, drained what remained. When my advisors warned of depleting funds, I dismissed them. The gods provide for their chosen one, I told them, ordering another shipment of silk from the distant east. The new taxes proved necessary, or so I convinced myself. A levy on trade caravans entering Rome, increased tributes from the provinces, and a special divine offering from every household. When reports reached me of families selling children to pay these duties, I merely shrugged. Sacrifices must be made for Rome's glory, I noted in passing to my treasurer, before returning to plans for my new palace extension with its floor of polished Egyptian porphyry. I rarely ventured beyond the palace walls, but necessity forced a journey across Rome to inspect the new temple. The squalor shocked me. Gaunt faces, crumbling insulae, beggars where prosperous shops once stood. "Why do they look so miserable?" I asked my praetorian. He hesitated before answering. "The devalued denarius buys half what it once did, Caesar." I tossed a handful of coins from my litter. "There, I have solved their problems." When grain ships from Egypt failed to arrive that summer, riots erupted in the Subura. I ordered the imperial granaries opened temporarily. The mob's cheers gratified me. "See how they love me now," I told Cleander as we watched from the Palatine. The distribution lasted 3 days before I sealed the granaries again. The marble for my new baths could not wait, and neither could the 100 lions for next month's spectacle. The people would understand. They always did. The Senate dared question my expenditures that autumn. "The provinces report famine," one graybeard intoned, "while Rome builds monuments." I silenced him with a glare. "Would you have Rome appear weak? Our enemies watch for signs of decline." In truth, governance bored me. Let the bureaucrats manage tax collection and grain distribution, tedious matters beneath imperial concern. My destiny was grander, to restore Rome's divine glory through spectacle and splendor that would echo through eternity. Reports of provincial rebellions reached me by winter. Farmers refusing tax collectors, merchants hoarding grain. "Ungrateful wretches," I wrote in my diary. "After all I've given them." My advisors suggested the treasury's emptiness and the people's hunger might be connected. Nonsense. Clearly, disloyal governors and foreign agitators were to blame. I ordered more executions and planned an even grander triumph. The people needed distraction from their troubles, not acknowledgement of them. Rome would be glorious again, whatever the cost. Marcia. My beloved Marcia. She entered my chambers as no other could, with a freedom granted by my affection. Her beauty was unparalleled, but it was her mind that truly captivated me. Unlike the senators who trembled before me, she spoke freely, her laughter genuine. I believed her devotion absolute, even as her eyes began to darken with something I mistook for concern rather than growing horror. I recall the night everything changed, though I did not recognize it then. I had ordered the execution of several senators for trivial offenses, their families to be displayed in the arena. As I described my plans over dinner, something shifted in Marcia's expression. She masked it quickly, suggesting instead we retire early. That night, her embrace seemed desperate, as if memorizing what she would soon betray. Had I been less consumed with my own divinity, I might have noticed her absences. Marcia began disappearing during afternoon hours, claiming visits to the baths. In truth, she was meeting with Eclectus, my chamberlain, and Laetus, my praetorian prefect. 3 people I trusted above all others, huddled in secret corners of my palace, plotting my demise while I planned new spectacles to glorify my name. I shared everything with Marcia. My dreams of being worshipped, my plans to fight as Hercules in the arena. She listened, stroked my hair, and called me her god. Meanwhile, she carried my secrets to my enemies. The conspirators grew in number, their courage fed by Marcia's reports of my increasingly erratic behavior. Still, I saw only adoration in her eyes, tasting no poison in her kisses. "Rome needs you strong," Marcia would whisper, encouraging my excesses while secretly condemning them. When I announced my intention to execute the entire Senate and replace them with my gladiators, she merely smiled and poured more wine. That night, I later learned, she wept in Eclectus's chambers, declaring I had become a monster who would destroy Rome itself if allowed to continue. How strange to think that as I felt most powerful, I was most vulnerable. While I planned a campaign to be declared a living god throughout the empire, Marcia was planning my death. The woman who shared my bed, who knew my every weakness, who had more freedom than any other person in my empire, she would be my downfall. And I, divine Commodus, suspected nothing until it was too late. The idea came to me during the winter feast, a revelation worthy of my divine status. Why appear at the New Year ceremonies in stuffy consular robes when I could make history? I would enter the January calends not as a mere consul, but as Hercules reborn, in full gladiatorial regalia. The procession to Jupiter's temple would become my greatest arena. My heart raced at the thought of the people's reaction to their emperor Gladiator leading Rome into 193. My announcement sent shock waves through the Senate. "Sacrilege," they whispered behind cupped hands. The priests of Jupiter turned pale when I detailed my plans to modify the sacred rites. Even Laertes, usually so accommodating, suggested reconsideration. They failed to understand. I was not desecrating tradition, but elevating it. By merging imperial authority with gladiatorial prowess, I would create a new Rome, one where strength and spectacle ruled above dusty ritual. I commissioned a special armor of gold and ivory, more magnificent than any gladiator had ever worn. The helmet was crowned with peacock feathers, the breastplate engraved with my victories. The craftsmen worked day and night while I practiced my entrance. I would not merely walk in procession. I would leap from a concealed platform, sword drawn, challenging the very gods to match my spectacle. The ceremony of consul taking would become legend. Strange dreams haunted me as the calends approached. I saw myself in the Colosseum, alone, the stands empty save for shadowy figures. One night I woke shouting, convinced someone had entered my chamber. Marcia soothed me with wine and sweet words, but her eyes held something I could not read. I dismissed these omens. What had a living god to fear? Yet I doubled my Praetorian guard and had my food tasted thrice. 5 days before the new year, I held a private rehearsal in my palace gymnasium. Eclectus and Laertes watched as I performed the ceremonial movements in my new armor. "Is this not perfection?" I asked, twirling my blade in the sunlight. Their applause seemed hollow. Later, I overheard them in heated whispers with Marcia. They fell silent when I approached. I should have questioned them, but my mind was consumed with perfecting my performance. Tomorrow would bring the dawn of 193, and with it, my greatest triumph. Rome would never forget the sight of Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, entering the new year as both ruler and warrior. I spent my final evening examining my armor once more, polishing the golden surface until I could see my reflection. My destiny was clear: to unite the glory of imperial power with the raw strength of the arena. The gods themselves must surely smile upon such ambition. That cursed tablet sealed my fate. I later learned Marcia discovered it in my chambers while I slept a death list penned in my own hand during one of my paranoid episodes. My own lover's name led the condemned Marcia, Eclectus, Laetus, their crimes, questioning my recent edicts. My erratic behavior had finally turned deadly, and they knew it. The tablet trembled in her hands as she read her own death sentence. She fled to Eclectus immediately, clutching the evidence. They gathered in Letus's quarters, a hasty council of the condemned. Tonight, Letus insisted, his military mind assessing the threat. It must be tonight. The New Year's feast provided perfect cover. They debated methods, the sword too messy, strangulation too uncertain. Poison emerged the silent killer. Marcia knew my habits, my medicines. She alone could deliver death without raising suspicion. I was told Marcia wept as she agreed to the plan. Despite my madness, we had shared 13 years. My confidant, my lover, now to be my executioner. What thoughts haunted her as she returned to my chambers, smiling as always? Did her hands shake as she prepared my evening wine, knowing it would be laced with poison come nightfall? I strutted through the palace, oblivious, planning my grand gladiatorial display. The palace buzzed with New Year preparations that final day. Garlands of laurel adorned the halls, and the scent of sacrificial incense filled the air. I inspected my gladiatorial armor, polished to gleaming perfection. Tomorrow, I told Letus, Rome will see her emperor in the arena again. He nodded gravely, already knowing I would never see that dawn. I mistook his solemnity for disapproval of my participation. I trusted them completely. That was my fatal error. Marcia brought me wine each evening before dinner, a ritual of 13 years. Eclectus managed my correspondence with unwavering efficiency. Letus commanded my praetorians, men who would die for me. Or so I believed. The palace security remained vigilant against external threats while death brewed within. I laughed with my would-be killers, blind to their forced smiles and nervous glances. As the winter sun set on December's final day in 192, I contemplated glory, not mortality. I would enter the arena as Hercules reborn, demonstrating my divine strength to all of Rome. The conspirators exchanged knowing glances as I boasted of tomorrow's triumph. To the new year, I toasted that evening, raising the cup Marcia had prepared. They echoed my toast with hollow voices, watching as I drank deeply of my own death. The evening of December 31st began innocently enough. After my bath, Marcia approached with a cup of wine, her smile unusually warm. "To celebrate the year's end, my emperor," she said, her voice honeyed. I noticed her fingers trembling slightly as she offered the cup. The wine looked darker than usual, but I thought little of it then. How blind I was to the treachery unfolding before me. I drank deeply, as was my custom. The wine tasted bitter, with an unfamiliar aftertaste that clung to my tongue. Within moments, my vision blurred. The room began to spin as though I were aboard a ship in stormy seas. "This wine," I muttered, clutching the edge of my couch. Marcia backed away, her face a mask of feigned concern. My stomach churned violently as realization dawned poison. My years of caution had prepared me for this moment. Each morning I consumed small doses of various poisons and Emperor's insurance against assassination. My body fought against the toxin as I staggered to my feet. "Guards!" I called, but my voice emerged as a whisper. From beyond my chamber doors I heard urgent whispers. "It's not working quickly enough," a man's voice hissed. Betrayal surrounded me. With trembling hands, I forced my fingers down my throat, retching violently onto the mosaic floor. The poison had to be expelled. Through watery eyes, I saw Marcia's face pale with terror. She backed toward the door where Eclectus and Latus now stood, their expressions grim. "He's purging it," Marcia whispered. I heard Latus curse. "Then we must proceed to the other method," he said coldly. "Marcia," I gasped. "Why?" My mind cleared enough to understand the full scope of the betrayal. She who had shared my bed for years now sought my death. Her eyes met mine, not with love, but with cold determination. "You would have killed us all eventually," she replied, "as you killed so many others." The room grew quiet, save for my labored breathing. I reached for the dagger I kept beneath my pillow, but my limbs felt leaden. The poison had weakened me, but not enough. I saw the silent communication between the conspirators. Their plan had failed. Latus nodded to someone outside my view. Heavy footsteps approached as I struggled to rise. "The Emperor is unwell," Latus announced loudly. "Restrain him for his own safety." I knew then that the cup had been merely the beginning. They would not let me survive the night. The poison coursed through my veins, weakening, but not killing. I lay there, drifting between consciousness and darkness when the door creaked open. Narcissus entered, not my trusted secretary, but the wrestler, a mountain of a man with hands like iron claws. His eyes held no emotion as he approached. I knew then what the conspirators had planned. The poison was merely the first act. Strangulation would be the finale. I struggled to rise, my limbs betraying me. "Guards!" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No response came. Those who had sworn to protect me with their lives had been dismissed or bribed. Narcissus approached with the steady confidence of a predator. I lunged at him, summoning the strength that had felled countless gladiators in the arena. My fist connected with his jaw, but it was like striking marble. The irony was not lost on me as his hands encircled my throat. How many had I sentenced to this very fate? The wrestler's grip tightened, professional, efficient. I clawed at his wrists, gasping for air that would not come. My vision blurred, red spots dancing before my eyes. The son of Marcus Aurelius, divine Commodus, was dying like a common criminal in his own chambers. I felt my strength ebbing with each heartbeat. Where was Hercules now? The god I had embodied in the arena had abandoned me. My lungs burned for air, my fingers losing their grip on Narcissus's arms. The faces of those I had executed flashed before me. Senators, rivals, my own family members. Was this their revenge from beyond the grave? The justice of the underworld reaching up to claim me? Darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. My body betrayed me completely now. no longer responding to my desperate commands to fight. I thought of Rome, my Rome that I had ruled as a living god. Would they remember me as divine or as monster? The conspirators would rewrite my history. I knew this as surely as I knew my life was ending. My father's disappointment seemed to fill the room. My final thought was not of gods or glory, but of bitter betrayal. Those I had elevated had orchestrated my fall. The Senate would rejoice. As consciousness fled, I felt a strange peace replace my rage. The pressure on my throat seemed distant now. I, who had sent so many to the afterlife, was finally making the journey myself. Darkness took me completely, and Commodus, Emperor of Rome, son of the divine Marcus Aurelius, was no more. I witnessed my own death through strange, disembodied eyes. Eclectus and Latus hovered over my corpse, fingers pressed against my neck, confirming what they already knew. Narcissus stood trembling, his wrestler's hands still marked with my blood. "It is done," Latus whispered, his voice echoing as if from across a vast chasm. I tried to scream, to command, to threaten, but I had become nothing more than a phantom in my own palace. They wrapped my body in a carpet. Me, Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, living god of Rome, like common rubbish to be discarded. Through the servants' passage, Laetus directed. The Praetorians must not see until arrangements are made. I followed my own corpse through shadowed corridors I had walked as master just hours before. The conspirators' whispers filled the night. Pertinax must be summoned immediately. My rage burned without heat. My curses fell without sound. Latus negotiated with my Praetorians as if they had not sworn oaths to me. The emperor died of apoplexy. He lied smoothly, offering each man a generous donative from my treasury. Pertinax will double your pay. I watched my own guard captain purchase my killer's safety with my gold. The Senate was summoned before dawn, old men blinking sleep from their eyes, hiding their relief poorly, as they hurried to declare Pertinax emperor before my body had even cooled. By morning, heralds announced throughout Rome that I had succumbed to natural causes. I drifted through the forum, watching faces. The patricians could barely contain their jubilation, while merchants calculated how this might affect their fortunes. Some common people genuinely wept, those who had shared my spectacles and received my generosity. A woman placed flowers at my father's column and whispered, "May you find peace, Hercules Romanus." That single kindness amid the betrayal pierced me more deeply than Narcissus's blade. The Senate that had trembled before me now found its courage. "The tyrant is dead," declared old Cassius, who had always smiled to my face. "Let his statues be toppled, his name struck from monuments." They voted for damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of my memory, as if I had never been divine, never ruled, never existed. I had been a god by their own decree. Now they unmade me with equal enthusiasm, their hypocrisy as boundless as their ambition. I watched workers chisel my name from inscriptions, topple my statues, and melt my coins to be restruck with Pertinax's austere profile. Not even 3 days had passed. The empire I had ruled for 12 years continued without pause, the machinery of Rome grinding forward as if I had been merely a broken cog, easily replaced. My father had prepared me for everything except this nothingness, this erasure, this ultimate betrayal. In death, I finally understood the lesson he had tried to teach me about power's impermanence. From the shadowy realm beyond life, I witnessed the ultimate betrayal. The Senate, those sniveling cowards who had feared me in life, decreed damnatio memoriae against me. They sought to erase my very existence from the annals of Rome. My name was to be struck from records, my deeds unwritten, my legacy scattered to the winds like ashes. The final insult from those who had once bowed before me. I watched in horror as my statues were toppled throughout the empire. In the forum, ropes were thrown around my marble likeness, and with jeers, the mob pulled until I crashed to the ground. My face was hammered away, my features reduced to unrecognizable rubble. The bronze statue at Ostia was melted down, my metal form bubbling away in the flames like my memory in the minds of Romans. My name was chiseled from every inscription, every dedication, every public work I had commissioned. The magnificent arch I had built at Beneventum now stood anonymous, my achievements attributed to my successor. The temple I had restored on the Palatine bore another's name. Even the aqueduct that had brought fresh water to thousands was renamed, as if the cool relief it provided had not been my gift to Rome. The mint workers labored day and night to recall my coins, melting them down to stamp with another's visage. My profile, once pressed into gold and silver and carried in purses throughout the empire, vanished from commerce and memory alike. The divine honors I had been granted were rescinded, my name struck from the rolls of deified emperors. My priests were disbanded, my cult dissolved, my altars repurposed. I had built my reign on the foundation of eternal glory. Every action, every conquest, every monument was meant to ensure I would be remembered forever. Yet here was the Senate, methodically erasing me from history's pages. The cruelest cut was not the assassin's blade that ended my life, but this calculated obliteration of all I had been. To die is human, but to be forgotten, that is to die twice. In bitter moments I understood their hatred. I had ruled with an iron hand, crushed opposition, and indulged my worst impulses. Yet did not my roads still carry their legions? Did not my laws still order their days? My buildings still sheltered their commerce? They could strike my name from marble, but my essence remained in the very stones of Rome. No Senate decree could truly condemn me to oblivion. The Senate tried to erase me from history after my death. They called it damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. My statues were toppled, my name chiseled from monuments. Yet I remained. Like a persistent whisper, my legacy refused to fade. Senators who despised me in life unwittingly ensured my immortality through their very attempts to vilify me. How ironic that their hatred preserved me. Cassius Dio portrayed me as a monster, claiming I considered myself divine and forced others to worship me. Herodian painted me as an effeminate, Eastern-loving degenerate. The Historia Augusta, that collection of half-truths, described lavish feasts where I supposedly drowned guests in rose petals. Each account more outlandish than the last. Each writer never having met me, yet certain of my character. I would give anything to confront these historians, to demand they acknowledge context. Yes, I challenged traditions. But Rome was changing. The empire had outgrown its provincial origins. I embraced Eastern customs because I saw Rome's future there. They called it madness. I called it vision. They recorded scandal. I lived authenticity. The histories mention my excesses, but never my reforms. Yet there is satisfaction in knowing I was never forgotten. The good emperors blur together in history's memory. Antoninus, Pius, Marcus, dutiful men who followed tradition, but who remembers them with the same vivid clarity. My name evokes immediate recognition, immediate reaction. I would rather be remembered in infamy than lost to the bland approval history grants to mediocrity. I regret certain cruelties. Power revealed darker aspects of my nature I had not known existed. But I refuse to apologize for living as I chose, for challenging the hypocrisies of Roman society, for refusing to be the emperor they demanded. They wanted a puppet. I gave them authenticity. They wanted tradition. I gave them transformation. History judges me harshly, but I judged Rome first. Centuries later, I wonder what these modern people make of me. I hear they write stories, create images, debate my sanity and my legacy. Some defend me now, seeing what contemporaries could not. Others still condemn, but all remain fascinated. My whispers have traveled through time, growing neither fainter nor clearer, but transforming with each ear that hears them. This, perhaps, is true immortality. My death unleashed chaos beyond my darkest imaginings. Rome, which I had ruled with a firm hand for 12 years, descended into madness. 5 men claimed the imperial throne within a single year. The senators who had whispered against me soon learned that removing a strong emperor only invites greater turmoil. I watch from the afterlife as my predictions unfold. The stability I maintained crumbled like dust in the wind. Pertinax, that old general, replaced me first. A disciplinarian, much like myself, yet lacking my political acumen. The Praetorians tolerated him for a mere 86 days before their daggers found his heart. He attempted to reform their privileges, a fatal miscalculation I would never have made. I knew those guards required both fear and reward. Pertinax understood only the former. What followed disgusted even me. The Praetorians, my Praetorians, auctioned the empire like a common trinket. Didius Julianus, that wealthy fool, outbid Sulpicianus with 25,000 sesterces per guard. He purchased Rome with coin rather than earning it through blood and strategy. The people rioted in the streets. Even in death, I felt their cause for vengeance. Julianus lasted barely 2 months. 3 generals then marched on Rome, each commanding loyal legions. Septimius Severus, shrewd and ruthless, moved fastest from Pannonia. Pescennius Niger in Syria and Clodius Albinus in Britannia also declared themselves emperor. I admired Severus's cunning. He temporarily allied with Albinus, neutralizing one threat while he eliminated Niger. The tactics I would have employed myself. Severus proved himself my true successor in spirit, if not in blood. He executed those who had conspired against me, though claiming it was justice for Pertinax. He disbanded my treacherous Praetorians, replacing them with loyal men from his Danubian legions. I watched with satisfaction as my enemies fell one by one. The Senate, which had celebrated my death, now trembled before a man even less forgiving than I. Civil war ravaged what I had built. Severus eventually turned on Albinus, crushing him at Lugdunum in the bloodiest battle between Romans in generations. The empire I loved bled from self-inflicted wounds. Yet I felt vindication. Those who thought my removal would restore the Republic instead got an emperor more autocratic than myself. Rome learned too late that stability requires a firm hand. My hand. The year of 5 emperors proved my worth. Severus, the man who both condemned and deified me. After my death, he emerged from the bloody civil war victorious, stepping over corpses to claim my throne. At first, he needed the Senate's approval, so he condemned my memory. A political necessity, I suppose. My statues toppled, my name chiseled from monuments. The usual theater of damnatio memoriae that so pleases the senatorial class. Yet Severus was nothing if not pragmatic. Once secure in power, he needed legitimacy more than senatorial approval. So I became useful again. He declared himself the adopted son of Marcus Aurelius, a complete fiction, making himself my posthumous brother. The audacity almost made me laugh from beyond the grave. My divine status was restored, and suddenly Divus Commodus appeared in imperial pronouncements. I found it both irritating and amusing to be used as his political prop. One day condemned as a tyrant, the next elevated to godhood, all to serve another man's ambition. Yet I understood his game. Power requires legitimacy. By claiming kinship with me and my father, he created a new dynasty with borrowed roots. The Severan branch grafted onto the Antonine tree. I watched his reign with curious eyes from Elysium. Severus understood what I had known. The army, not the Senate, was the true power in Rome. He raised military pay, expanded their privilege, and filled the Praetorian Guard with his loyal countrymen from Africa. The Senate protested, of course. They always do when their illusion of authority is threatened. Like me, Severus had no patience for pretense. He governed with an iron fist and made no apologies for it. Unlike me, he was never seduced by the arena's glory or the crowd's adoration. His pleasures were simpler: family, duty, and the expansion of Rome's borders. Where I sought to be Hercules reborn, he was content to be merely a successful emperor. His final advice to his sons revealed our shared understanding: enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. Harsh words, but honest. Rome was a military empire pretending to be a republic. At least Severus acknowledged this truth openly. Perhaps that is why history judges him less harshly than me. He played the game better, maintaining the necessary illusions while wielding absolute power. The Rome I left behind was not the same as the one my father bequeathed me. 12 years had altered the very foundation of our empire. The treasury, once overflowing with 29 million denarii, now lay nearly empty. My campaigns against the Germanic tribes, necessary as they were, had drained our coffers. The Praetorian Guard had grown accustomed to generous donatives, a precedent I set that would haunt my successors. The Senate had withered under my rule. I saw little use for their endless deliberations when decisive action was needed. Many called this tyranny, but they did not face the barbarians at our borders or the conspiracies within our walls. The senatorial families retreated to their estates, building private armies of clients and cultivating regional loyalties. a dangerous seed I recognized too late. My military reforms strengthened our frontiers, but altered the balance of power. I increased soldier pay by 1/3 and granted them the right to legal marriage while in service. The legions became more loyal to their commanders than to Rome itself. This was not mere folly. I needed their loyalty when plots emerged from every shadow. Yet I created an army that could make and unmake emperors. The eastern provinces prospered despite my neglect. Syria and Egypt sent their grain and taxes without requiring my constant attention. Britannia, however, remained troublesome. My withdrawal from Caledonia was condemned as weakness, but I saw no profit in holding barren highlands at such cost. The wall my father built became our true frontier, a monument to pragmatism over pride. The common people felt my reign most directly through the debasement of currency. The silver denarius, once nearly pure, contained barely 50% precious metal by my death. Merchants were not fooled. Prices rose accordingly. Yet what choice did I have? The empire's expenses could not be met by taxation alone. I chose inflation over rebellion. Perhaps history will judge this harshly. My father, Marcus Aurelius, ruled during the last golden days of Pax Romana. I governed during its twilight. The plague that began in his time continued through mine, claiming thousands. Provincial rebellions flared more frequently. The German tribes grew bolder. I am called the beginning of the decline, but I merely faced its first tremors. Rome was changing, and I changed with it. Perhaps too much, perhaps not enough. My participation in the arena transformed the very nature of gladiatorial combat. Where once these games served merely as funeral rites or occasional diversions, I elevated them to the pinnacle of Roman entertainment. The crowds no longer came simply to witness blood and skill. They came to see their emperor, sword in hand, facing death as they did. This connection between ruler and people was unprecedented. My predecessors remained distant figures, but I stood before Rome unshielded, a mortal god. My critics claimed I debased the imperial dignity, but they failed to understand my purpose. By entering the arena, I embodied the martial spirit that built our empire. The games were not mere blood sport, but a reflection of Roman virtue, courage, skill, and the confrontation of mortality. I allocated unprecedented resources to the ludus, constructing training facilities that rivaled the finest military academies. Under my patronage, gladiatorial combat reached its zenith of technical sophistication. I introduced innovations that outlived my reign. The pairing of exotic beasts with specialized venators became standard practice after my spectacular hunts. My system of ranking gladiators by victories rather than merely by their fighting style created new pathways to fame. The ceremonial processions I designed, with musicians and elaborate costumes, became tradition. Even my enemies could not deny that the games had never before achieved such grandeur or popular devotion. Some of my practices were abandoned after my death. The direct participation of an emperor in combat was deemed too dangerous by my successors. They preferred to watch rather than fight, a return to the old distance between ruler and ruled. The special matches I arranged between female gladiatresses fell out of favor, though they had drawn enormous crowds. My rivals could not match my showmanship, nor did they understand how the arena served as both entertainment and political theater. The games changed after my reign, becoming more formulaic and less innovative. Yet my influence remained. The schools I established continued to produce the finest fighters in the empire. The architectural improvements I made to arenas throughout the provinces stood as monuments to my vision. Most importantly, I had demonstrated that gladiatorial combat was not merely a diversion, but a vital expression of Roman identity, a philosophical statement about our values of courage and merit. History may judge me harshly for many things, but in the arena, I created a legacy that could not be erased. I forged a direct bond with the people of Rome that no Senate decree or political marriage could match. When I fought, covered in sweat and sand, I was both more and less than emperor. I was Roman. This truth, this authenticity, was my greatest contribution to the games. Long after my name was cursed in the Senate House, it was still cheered in arenas across the empire. The scrolls of Tacitus and Suetonius painted me as a monster, their words dripping with venom and falsehood. They claimed I was cruel beyond measure, that I delighted in suffering. How convenient for them to forget my 20 years of stable governance, the peace I maintained, the borders I secured. Their poisoned quills served those who came after me, eager to distance themselves from my policies while secretly emulating them. Throughout the ages, my name became synonymous with tyranny. Medieval chroniclers, understanding nothing of Rome's complexities, reduced me to a cautionary tale. Renaissance writers, obsessed with republican virtues, condemned my imperial necessities. Each generation added layers to the myth, burying the truth deeper. I watched from the shadows of time as my legacy was twisted, my achievements forgotten, my pragmatic decisions recast as madness. The comparisons to Nero and Caligula wounded most deeply. I, who ruled with calculation and purpose, lumped together with a musician who fancied himself an artist and a boy who never learned the art of governance. Their reigns were brief flashes of chaos. Mine brought decades of order. Their actions sprang from impulse and madness. Mine from necessity and vision. Yet history remembers us as variations of the same disease. Modern films portrayed me as a caricature, always sneering, always plotting, as if I had no other occupation than villainy. I watched actors strut about in poor imitations of imperial regalia, delivering lines I would never have spoken. They reduced the complex calculations of empire to simple malice, the subtleties of power, the necessary compromises, the weight of decisions that affected millions, all sacrificed for dramatic simplicity. The greatest injustice was the stripping of context from my reign. Actions that preserved Rome's stability were judged by the moral standards of societies that existed a millennium later. Did they think governance was a gentle art? The Roman world was not maintained with kind words and noble intentions. It required blood and iron, decisive action against threats both external and internal. My methods were those of my time, not theirs. If I could speak directly to those who study me now, I would ask them to consider the empire I inherited and the one I left behind. Judge me not by isolated incidents, cherry-picked by hostile sources, but by the decades of prosperity under my rule. Rome endured because of men like me who made difficult choices. History may paint me as a villain, but I remain what I always was, a guardian of Rome, willing to bear any burden, including that of a blackened legacy. History's judgment means nothing to those who lived as gods. I ruled not as mere men do, but as Hercules incarnate. My arena victories, 13,821, stand testament to divine favor. The Senate feared my connection to the people, my willingness to meet them in the dust and blood of the arena rather than hide behind marble columns. They called it madness. I called it divine communion. My greatest achievement was breaking the chains of tradition. I showed Rome that an emperor could be both divine sovereign and champion of the plebeians. The grain dole increased under my reign. The currency remained stable for years. I commissioned public works that stand even now, yet they remember only the blood. They forget that Rome was built on blood, sustained by blood, and would eventually drown in it, with or without me. I failed to see the serpents at my breast, trusted advisors who smiled while sharpening knives. Perhaps I should have been more like my father, cautious, philosophical, remote, but I was born for glory, not shadows. The conspirators who strangled me in my bath could not kill what I truly was. Gods do not die, they merely change form. My spirit endures in every arena where men test their courage. History remembers me as cruel and capricious. What they fail to understand is that divinity cannot be judged by mortal standards. When I renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, it wasn't vanity, but prophecy. I saw that the empire needed a new identity to survive. I recognized that the old republican values were hollow shells. My reforms might have saved Rome from its eventual collapse had they been embraced. I was not merely Commodus the Emperor or Commodus the Gladiator. I was the bridge between worlds, divine and mortal, patrician and plebeian. In the arena's sand, I found truth that eluded me in the Senate. There, covered in sweat and glory, I was most myself. Not the shadow of my father, not the puppet of advisors, but a man transformed into something greater through will and divine favor. Rome will fall. This I see clearly now from the shores of eternity. All empires are but moments in time. Yet what I built in the hearts of the people, the memory of an emperor who fought for them, bled with them, celebrated with them, that shall outlast marble and gold. They will remember Commodus when greater emperors are forgotten. For I lived not as men should, but as gods would dare.